AMD stock investors are going to want to watch this video, especially since we have earnings coming up in a few days, and there's a lot of bullish and bearish scenarios that could be happening with AMD right now. So in today's episode, I want to take a closer look at some of the recent updates, some that I'm getting very excited about, and some that maybe I'm not hoping to hear too much during the earnings call. So let's take a closer look in today's episode.
I want to thank the Motley Fool for sponsoring this video, and check out fool.com/Jose for the 10 best stocks to buy now. With that link, you get a promotional offer for the subscription service. Now, let's continue with today's episode.
All right, so AMD is expected to report earnings on Tuesday, and this is what the market is expecting. We're expecting revenue to be somewhere around $7.1 billion and earnings per share to be roughly 93 cents. Now, all that, it would be a great year-over-year growth. We can see that would be about a 30% year-over-year growth on revenue and about a 50% year-over-year growth in earnings per share. Some might be wondering, Jose, how is this such a massive grower right now? A few things, right? Just a year ago, we were still kind of in a massive inventory correction and kind of like the PC cycles and a lot of their other industries that it caused revenue to decline. But unfortunately, what was happening there was also kind of like this massive over inventory. So not only was there an over inventory correction, but during those times, they tend to sell products at a very, very low cost to try to get rid of all the inventory. And it causes earnings per share to decrease dramatically. That's why kind of like, even though revenue is going to be up 30%, earnings per share is expected to be up 50%, right? That's the main reason. As pricing gets back to normal, you don't have to sell everything at a much lower price because of that over inventory issue. Now, when we look at AMD's earnings this past quarter, about 3 months ago, we can see that revenue is exactly what the market is expecting, around that $7.1 billion plus or minus $300. Now, there are a few things that I think maybe investors are going to want to consider. And obviously, one of the big things is guidance at the moment. Now, on April 15th of 2025, we did see that AMD submitted a SEC filing where they mentioned that the United States has kind of created more export restrictions for AI chips. And one of AMD's MI300 products, the MI308, which was meant for the Chinese market, is no longer going to be able to be sold. And for that, they're going to take a $800 million in inventory commitment. Remember, this is inventory commitment. This isn't exactly how much they would have sold these cards for. They probably would have sold it for a lot higher than that. So they are expecting to kind of lose some revenue, a nice amount of revenue projections from there. The question is, and this is probably one of the biggest bearish takes, is like, how much of a hit is this going to impact guidance for the full year? Because, right, $800 million, I think many people, especially in the YouTube community, are seeing this as $800 million loss in revenue. No, this is an $800 million loss in inventory. That inventory can actually be worth a lot more based on how they sell it, right? So that's a huge hit for future guidance, and how much of that was kind of already expected for maybe a full year guidance. Now, remember, this kind of export restriction didn't happen until April 15th, and I do believe that's already outside of this quarter that they are going to report. So on a current quarterly basis, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's more going to be on how it impacts guidance. Now, the other thing that I want to take a closer look at is with this kind of export restrictions, is AMD going to kind of create a new chip that's going to be compliant for China? We've already heard that its competitor NVIDIA is thinking of doing that, reportedly, not confirmed, but reportedly that NVIDIA is going to create kind of another chip that is going to be redesigned for the Chinese market. Is AMD going to follow suit, as this is obviously a big market opportunity for them? So that's something that I think investors are going to want to listen to in the upcoming earnings call. Now, some great things in my opinion is AMD is making some advancements in its software solutions. We did see that they released ROCm 6.4, some great update there. They talk about how they're breaking barriers in AI and high performance computing and modular GPU software. Now, the software market is something that AMD has reportedly been lagging compared to its competitor NVIDIA, but we are seeing some strong innovation and updates happening here. Now, one of the most most respected semiconductor group that I follow, Semi Analysis, actually about 2 weeks ago did a piece on AMD, and it mentions that AMD is actually moving really forward and doing rapid improvements on forms of their software and hardware solution. That obviously is not going to happen right away, but in the long term, especially kind of looking at that MI400 platform, it is creating some form of strength, and AMD is becoming a true threat to NVIDIA, especially for those long-term opportunities. So Semi Analysis just a few months ago kind of talked a little bit about some of the bearish takes behind AMD and some of the lag it had in kind of the software solutions. It seems AMD took a lot of that criticism and started to build on top of it. So that's actually really good. And it kind of showcases how Lisa Su is a great CEO and it listens to a lot of the criticism and tries to create teams. Remember, all these updates, though, is not something that can happen overnight or be fixed overnight, but it does seem like they're going in the right direction. And as an AMD investor, that is very bullish. Now, kind of talking here with the AI space, AMD does have their AI event of 2025 happening now in June 12th. Normally, this happens in late of the year because that's when AMD releases kind of their next generation GPU. But this time, we heard from last quarter that they are pulling the MI350 ahead of schedule. And because of that, they're obviously going to be running the Advancing AI event ahead of schedule as well. I don't know why I said ahead of schedule like that, but overall, this is kind of bullish. And what I am really expecting, I don't think maybe in the earnings call we're going to get too much information, especially since June 12th is just right around the corner, and we're probably going to hear a lot of things. But the MI350, what would be extremely bullish is if they get some new customer or if their current customers are buying a lot in a lot of their AI GPUs. Now, there is one very bullish catalyst that could happen, and just hear me through. So first, Meta did announce that they are going to increase their capital expenditure for the year. They increased it from 60 to 65 billion to 64 to 72 billion. So about a $4 billion growth on the lower end and about a $7 billion growth in the top end. Now, for some reason, there are some discussions, then I posted this on Twitter, that many people believe that AMD Meta solely uses AMD for their GPU solutions and their AI solutions. That's not true at all. Meta does use it for some of their Llama solutions exclusively for certain lives, but Meta, most of their AI capex is actually used for their core products, and that is things like their recommender systems for the ad market, their recommender systems for the content that they provide. So, they've continued to say that a majority of this capital expenditure will be directed to their core business, not something AMD is a main provider here. Obviously, in the AI solution, they kind of do have some strength, but again, NVIDIA is still a big player. So if there's any YouTubers out there telling you that that Meta is exclusively using AMD, that's not true, because in theory, right, that $60 billion would mean that AMD should be making a lot more money in AI chips. Regardless of that, let me just I was just trying to bring back to reality, but there is a bullish case here. AMD, like we saw, is increasing or pulling ahead their MI350. And the reason being is because they're getting a lot of a lot of customer traction from existing and new customers. So what AMD says. Now, could a possibility that Meta increase their CapEx is because they did see a lot of great traction from the MI350 and they saw some great results, and now they're willing to buy a lot more MI350s than maybe previously expected, and for that reason they are increasing the guidance. So there is a possibility where maybe a few hundred million, maybe even a billion or so go into AMD from this capital expenditure. And for AMD, a company who did almost over $5 billion last year, an extra few hundred million, an extra 1 billion is something that would grow this revenue dramatically. So that could be very strong for the company. Hopefully during the earnings call, we hear maybe a little bit more of potential customers, but I do believe we're most likely going to save all that great news, if there are great news, for the AI event, which is June 12th. But there is that catalyst potential with Meta, in my opinion. Now, another thing kind of talking here with AMD is AMD continues to be a strong technological leader. Many people believe that some of the, for example, NVIDIA is really good at designing chips in general. And if you hear even some of the NVIDIA engineers, is AMD actually designs chips really, really well. It's not like NVIDIA does it better. They have obviously other strengths, but AMD continues to showcase that it is a strong player in the semiconductor design phase. And most recently, they achieved the first TSMC 2 nanometer product silicon milestone. So the first product to be kind of come out is AMD's next generation CPU, the Venice CPU, and it just kind of showcases how AMD is just continuing to push ahead. Maybe this is just that strong strength or that strong bullish case of why one should be an AMD investor and maybe necessarily not an Intel investor, because they're definitely trying to really push into the server CPU. So I thought that was actually pretty amazing. It showcases the leadership and how AMD continues to move in technology. Now, something also pretty cool on April 9th, we did see that AMD is creating kind of a AMD Pensando AI NIC, which is kind of like a network interface card. And this is kind of to scale out into next generation AI infrastructure. So I do believe they're making the building blocks, the Lego pieces. So in a year from now, 2 years from now, when they do release the MI 400, which is especially good for a lot of large scale training and kind of this large scale system, scale out system, things like this, like the AMD Pensando AI NIC, is going to be something that's going to help them achieve some amazing strength. So maybe in the short term, it might not be that exciting, but this is kind of like that connecting block for a year from now that it could be a strong strength for that bullish on the scale out system. Some other things that we do know is AMD did release kind of a new GPU during this time frame on February 28th. They did see some positive reaction from the market and YouTube reviewers about their RX 9070 and their RX 9070 XT and vanilla version. Now, obviously, this is a small market for them, but any small revenue here, even a few hundred million here, can definitely help beat revenue expectations. So I do believe, while obviously the world is focused on just AI GPUs, there are other avenues that AMD investors should focus in. Now, Intel recently reported earnings, and I think as an AMD investor, there are some things we can grab out of there. First, Intel does mention that they continue to see strong demand for their previous generation, the Raptor Lake, due to cost advantage and consumer focus on lower price points. Is this just that AMD's is creating such a strong strength in the premium CPU that the only way Intel can compete right now is through older and cheaper generations to kind of focus on that entry level? That's actually, it's going to be pretty interesting to see that. As a also investor of AMD, we can't ignore competition. Panther Lake on 18A is still expected to be launched at the end of 2025 and the first half of 2026. So that competition is definitely coming, especially if 18A does really well, and they did really well with the Panther Lake system. So Intel obviously taking market share, but they are definitely innovating in their own space and something investors should come up with or keep an eye out. Now, other things are both Intel and AMD obviously focused in the client side. And one of the big things impacting kind of like the consumer space right now in forms of sentiment is tariffs and macroeconomic. Now, Intel expects the potential for global tariffs to create cost and demand headwinds in the second half of 2025, and they foresee end customers possibly slowing or pivoting purchase decision. For that reason, Intel actually gave a weak quarter two guidance. The question is this just more of an Intel problem, or is AMD going to follow suit with that guidance as well? I actually believe AMD maybe might be a little bit stickier right now just because it is kind of pushing some strong CPU products and GPU products. So maybe they might not see complete weakness like Intel, but obviously the tariff space could be a massive headwind for a lot of the laptop space. Now, obviously, AMD has something better than Intel, the server CPUs, and more importantly, the server GPUs, and that's something investors are gonna want to kind of make sure is still progressing pretty good. The final thing, I actually did not have it here. I don't know how I forgot it, but CT System, AMD completes the acquisition of CT System. This acquisition, in my opinion, is super crucial for AMD. When they first announced the potential of acquiring this company, I mentioned that this to me was one of the biggest things that AMD can do, especially in this AI innovation. I still believe that's the case. I've done plenty of videos of AMD, plenty of long-term holder of this company as well. And this was one of the things that really got me excited to be an investor, because I do believe CT system, the scale out opportunity is going to be massive. Now, they just finished the acquisition on March 31st. What we're going to want to hear during the earnings call, do they have a partner that is going to buy the hardware side of the business? Because AMD, let's be honest, they only care about the engineering and design side here, so they can help scale out and design their upcoming GPUs. So we'll love to hear a lot more here. But to me, as an AMD investor here, even though I do own NVIDIA, I think AMD is moving really, really great. And that's why recently I actually purchased this stock. I purchased this stock a little bit over 5 days ago. I did it last Friday, not a few days ago, but the Friday before that. I did purchase some more shares of AMD, and this is one of the 4 stocks that I purchased. For those that are curious, the other stocks are Oracle, CoreWeave, and Marvell. Again, not this Friday that just passed, but a Friday ago, which was around April 25th is when I did a lot of purchasing. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you guys are thinking AMD is going to do after these earnings. Overall, short term, I don't know what could happen. Long term, this company is definitely moving in the right track. And I believe this can be a multi-bagger from here. So take care, have a good day, and see you all next time.